everybody. Welcome to Maker's Bar. We're looking to create 1 million leaders. I'm your host, Troy Goldenberg. I'm here today with Warren Hugh. Is it Hugh?
Yeah, Hugh or Hui, either way. Yeah.
Okay, Warren Hui. He is the founder at Soul Ventures. I'm very excited to be able to get to know his story and get to know him today. Warren, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Of course, of course. All right. I always love to start with what is your story? What did you do in your early career and your maybe even in your childhood? What brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, so maybe I'll go from the beginning, right? So I've always, had a huge interest in tech. When I was young, like 12 to 13, I started building websites. So actually in my childhood, I did start my first startup when I was around 14 to 15. And it was using my web building experience, which I've been doing for a few years, doing gigs for companies that needed websites. I actually founded a travel blog website that could translate multiple languages. And the thesis
Oh,
for that was that people who travel around the world would want to understand, other people's experiences, and they may not all be, English speaking. So there could be, stuff that lost in translation. So the platform allows people to upload travel blogs and translate them to multiple languages. We did raise some money for that. I ultimately failed, but it was a really good experience. And then fast forward, I went to college at USC, studied business, was quite interested in business and different aspects of capital markets, fundraising, and finance. So after graduation, I went to work at Morgan Stanley investment banking. So I did that for around 6 years. I basically covered most of the large corporates across Asia. I changed a few teams, but mostly what I did was M&A, IPO, and debt fundraising for all these large corporates. And I think after 6 years, I started to get bored, and I kind of remembered my dream of doing something in tech. So I quit and started Soul Ventures. And basically, my goal was to build a venture capital fund from scratch. And I think I was pretty lucky. When I left, actually, some of my clients from Morgan Stanley backed me. I raised some capital from some of the family offices in across Hong Kong and Asia, and then that's how we got started. So that's a very quick, high level background of where I came from and kind of my path to Soul Ventures today.
that's an extremely impressive background. The founding of your first company, your first startup at 14, that is incredible. That's unique.
Yeah, it was by chance, and we were just having fun while building stuff. Yeah.
So did you have partners that you did that with when you say we?
Yeah, actually, the funny story was I built up with my neighbor. So I had a neighbor who was an entrepreneur as well. He kind of had the idea, but he couldn't build websites or he didn't know coding. So he literally knocked on the door and said, "Hey, do you want to work on this?" And I was like, "Okay, cool." Yeah.
Oh, that is awesome. That's very cool. That's wow. Again, very, very impressive. Do you still keep in touch with that neighbor by chance? I'm just curious.
Yes, he's built a few companies, but his current one is quite successful. I bump into him from time to time, and we still keep in touch. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. And with Soul Venture, obviously you're a big tech guy, but what are some of the main product lines, main investments that you've made? So, what is your thesis when you're looking to invest in a company?
Yeah, so our very high arching thesis is that we want to invest in companies that disrupt and basically change people's lives for the better. Obviously, that's very general, but from that perspective, we really want to invest in startups that either have a product or service that could completely change the way you live your life. So that's kind of how we started to think about investments. And from that thesis, we basically delved into a few different verticals. Obviously, I think consumer internet is extremely important to us because consumer internet are these companies with tech and a brand that captures hundreds of millions of users. And basically change the way they behave or interact with those products. So key example of some of our investments in consumer internet are Reddit. Reddit kind of changed the way people interact online, how people gather information or ask questions or discuss. That's kind of a reflection of kind of a thesis and how over many years people actually got used to the format of Reddit. And then another good example would be Epic Games. I think it was really cool. It started as a shooter with Fortnite, and now it has basically branched out into what they call a metaverse platform, where multiple games, tools, and tools to make games are all available to players. So you're not just jumping into a shooting game; you can jump into multiple different games. You can hang out with friends, and ultimately that kind of changed the way users interact in an online, setting. Like I think 5 years ago, before Epic Games did it, no one would really attend an online concert. That like with the Travis Scott concert, I think that concert actually did more sales than Coachella that year. So it kind of changed the
Wow.
user behavior of how people hang out, and it's actually very it's very telling, right? With Apple Vision Pro and virtual reality coming closer and closer, we actually think that eventually, like something like the Matrix will not be that far off, from what users can experience. So that's the consumer internet side. And we also, the other arm we have is deep tech. So a lot of that focuses on AI. And for us, we actually think that AI is basically the biggest, super cycle that will disrupt the next probably 15 to 20 years. And we believe every tech company at the core will utilize AI, and it will be a commonplace technology. And that's why we are looking for, the best AI companies. We've been looking at it for quite a while. So we've invested in stuff like OpenAI as well, which we think is probably going to be sort of like a Google, meaning that it will be a leader and as an ecosystem, powering a lot of different AI companies, like thousands and thousands of AI companies, simply because the tech and the tools are so powerful. So deep tech AI is also a big focus for us these days. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. I do speak with a handful of people working with AI startups or creating their own, and I couldn't agree more. It's going to change the world in ways that we can't foresee, especially I can't foresee, as I'm not a huge AI expert, but it's incredible seeing what people are working on, and the way that things are already changing, let alone 10 years from now, and it really will be the backbone of every company. I agree with every company. Before we get to those 10 years, though, when you were setting up your company initially, what were the biggest challenges that you had to overcome?
Yeah, I think the biggest difficulty, like coming from a very well-known company like Morgan Stanley, you have the prestige, you have the platform. People may not know you, but because they understand you're from like Morgan Stanley, they automatically give you, the time of the day. I think when you start your own company, you're basically coming from zero. So there's a lot of trust to be built. There's a brand to be built, and everyone you meet will basically question exactly what you're trying to accomplish. And most of them will be skeptics that, hey, like, hey, you were like associate at a bank. How can you start like a VC fund like that? That doesn't actually make sense to me. So by building your own business, you basically have to get skeptics to buy into your idea. You have to build the resources for yourself. You have to build your platform, and yourself and the company is the brand ultimately, right? The founder is the brand and the person that basically anchors all the communications with people. And I found the first year, all of that was quite tough to do, doing it all from scratch. But I think once you land like your first investor or you land a key milestone, you can build off that, and then eventually it all falls into place. And after many hard earned hours and communicating, networking, hiring the right people, you basically have the foundation of a company that you started, and you have to kind of keep growing it every day. So that's, I think, the initial challenges we faced.
Very cool. So, to my understanding, it was kind of getting together your sales pitch of both you and the company. Is that what you're saying there?
Yeah, like I mean, especially in Asia, where we're based, there's so many VC funds. There's there's early stage, there's growth, there are different like sector focus. Some are generalists, like investors and companies that you try to invest into. They'll ask you like, what's your edge? Why should we either invest in your fund, or why should we give you allocation? And ultimately, the first year we didn't really have a really good, solid answer to that. But after, working at it, raising money, speaking with investors, getting advice, I think we ultimately landed at a place where Soul Ventures would basically invest in the best disruptive, tech companies in the West, and we will bridge it to the East by capital and resources, because we understood that most startups that begin in the US or regions around the US eventually want to go global, and there's a lot of bridges, partnerships, customers that need to be acquired across the Asian region, especially how fragmented it is. And that was kind of how we added value and kind of stood out to portfolio companies. And then for our LPs, we stood out because we could give them access to some of the most promising or well-known, tech startups that they wanted exposure to. So that's kind of how we build up our core, key values for, both sides of our company.
That makes sense. That makes sense that would be your edge, given your background and given what you've been working on. That it's definitely hard to find, but once you find it, that's a great value add that you can bring to investors that can set you apart. I'd imagine that was a satisfying, when you first got that first investor, imagine a very satisfying moment. What was some of the most satisfying, or maybe the most satisfying moment so far in this journey? I know it's a young journey, but what have you hit so far that stands out to you?
Yeah, I think to start a VC fund, once you get the first few anchor investors, I think that's extremely satisfying, because whether you like it or not, those first initial, checks are going to be your lifelong partners, right? They're going to advise you, they're going to supervise you, they're going to ask you key questions along the way, because they have the most input, because they were there first. So I think it was really satisfying when we, raised our first few $1 million from some of the most prominent, family offices across Asia. These are like the largest real estate companies, casino company, different sectors. And it was very interesting, to take their capital and put it to work, but also to, get their advice, every month, catch up with them and work with them as partners. So that was, I think, early on in the journey was extremely satisfying. And then as we scaled up, the most satisfying was obviously getting into really key or hard to get deals. So I think the latest example will be OpenAI. I believe it's currently one of the most sought after or hard to access, names in the tech space. Everyone's talking about it. And, getting our chance to invest in a company of this caliber was extremely satisfying, a huge win for us. And we, couldn't believe that just 3 years ago, we started from nothing, and now we're investing in some of the best AI companies in the world.
So what is that story? How did you get that opportunity to invest in OpenAI?
Yeah, it's very funny. I think it all started. We have a key venture partner in the U.S. I actually went to college with him. He has his own VC fund, also focused on space and deep tech. So I think we were always trying to invest into OpenAI, but we never had a chance. So what we did was we actually invested in some of the other, early stage AI and robotics company that Sam Altman, invested into. Like one of them is like Coco Robotics. It's a food delivery robotics company out of Los Angeles, and Sam Altman led that. So we basically invested in some of the earlier stuff, and then he invested in this humanoid company called 1X, which OpenAI led. And through we saw it as kind of like stepping stones, like through investing alongside Sam Altman at OpenAI, we started to get a relationship going, and eventually. That venture partner became friends with Sam, given the investments we all did together following him. And then through getting to know Sam and Sam liking him, he gave us the opportunity to invest in the last tender. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. That's a really interesting part of the venture capital game for me to learn about. Because obviously part of the game is identifying opportunities. But once you identify, it doesn't mean that you're going to get the opportunity to actually go in there and invest. So, um, yeah, it's an incredible story. I really love that. How long did that process take?
Probably like 2.5 2 years. Like we've been working at it. Um, yeah, but we were lucky and we were fortunate that we saw that AI and robotics was going to be really huge, and we started putting capital to work like 2 years ago before it became such a big topic, and we're just
Mhm.
happy to continue investing in the space. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. And then as your company is growing, what are some key values that you hold that you instill in the company, uh, to keep the company on track through the decades?
Yeah, I think there's a few key things. I think first of all, because at the core, venture capital fund, you're managing other people's money. I think integrity is probably on top of the list. Like people have to trust you with their money, whether it's like 100,000 or like 100 million. I don't think there's any difference in how you operate, how you treat your LPs or work with them. So for us, integrity means we're super transparent. Um, we are very detailed. We tell our investors what's our process of picking companies, screening companies, our diligence, and then also how we're managing their money, because ultimately there are thousands of VCs in the world, right? You don't have to put your capital with us, but if you put your capital with us, we're going to try our best to make you comfortable, to keep you updated. And as you know, in the last like 3 4 years, markets are up and down. There's a huge crash in tech. Many VC funds, lost a lot of money or even shut down. So managing I think your partners and your investors through the cycle is extremely important, and also being very diligent and careful with investments in general, right? And then I think the second key value we always have is being thesis driven, right? You have to have really good ideas, to come up with good investments. And a lot of the time, when you come up with a good thesis, you actually have to test it by investing in companies and understanding and learning from those investments. And you could be wrong, right? Like I'm not saying every thesis we had was always right from investing, but if you don't have a thesis, then you're just gonna follow, the bigger VCs, the name brands, and you're just going to not really get why you won so big on a name or why you lost so big on a name, right? And I think having the core ideas and thesis also sets you apart when you talk to your investors. Like, hey, we're seeing this cycle coming. That's why we're going to invest in XYZ. And I think that's a lot of value add, because investors are not only putting your capital, they want to get education, right? They want to
Mhm.
understand, what's going on with AI, right? Everyone's asking that. Where do we invest in AI? What's going on? Like, what are the names that we need to put capital in this year? What are the names that are going to blow up in the next 5 years, right? They're putting capital with you not just to make money, but also to understand, why certain things are growing at such a pace as they are. So I believe like those are probably our key like values that we instill in the team, and the way we operate, the way we communicate, and source deals, talk to founders. That it all reflects in basically everything we do. Right.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Um, I love transparency and just I think the more simple you can keep things, the better off you'll be. And something actually I don't hear a lot is we're also looking to add value through education. People want to learn. So I like that you brought that up because it's not something that's brought up a lot in these conversations. So it's a very unique point you have there. And as you go forward through these, how are you define success for yourself with me? You see winners, but just like on a big scale.
Yeah. Sorry. You got cut off. I think you're.
Oh,
Yeah. Can you repeat that? Yeah.
yeah. So I was asking what success looks like for you and for the company. Obviously, you want to pick winners, but beyond just picking a Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think something about winners and what success looks like. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting that this I've never had this problem before. So I wonder if it's StreamYard or if it's on my end. Yeah, so I was asking, beyond just picking a winner, what does success look like for you and your company?
Yeah, so obviously, picking winners is important. We have to make good returns for investors. But ultimately, I think investing in companies that really change the world or how people, live is kind of our main overarching goal, right? Like our main purpose is to invest in companies that disrupt people's lives and change it for the better. So I think huge success would probably look like um, investors or people from the outside will be like, hey, why do you invest in, let's say, this up and coming AI company? Like it doesn't make sense. We don't understand the technology or something. But fast forward 5 years, it might change like the way how everyone does work or lives or changes their daily life. So I think ultimately we want to have indirect impact by investing in these companies that just change the way that ultimately people live their lives and hopefully improve it, right? So a good example would be like OpenAI, right? With ChatGPT, powering so much work and productivity, the way you currently work, write, or even understand information is completely changed just from this one core product. And we hope that we can continue finding companies that just completely changes the daily lives of millions of people. And at the end of the day, people are like, wow, that's amazing product that added a lot of value to our lives. And I think as venture capitalists, that's probably the ultimate goal, right? To invest in these ideas that didn't make sense at the beginning, but at the end of the day, it helps so many people.
I think it's a great thing to keep in mind as you move forward. And then, how has your business evolved and changed since its inception 3 years ago to now? And how do you see it evolving as you go forward?
Yeah, I think when we first started, we kind of had many theses. We invested in a lot of companies. Some of them didn't perform well. Some of them did quite well. I think going forward, because of how monumental AI has become, everything we look at, even whether it's like consumer internet or like e-commerce or just um, tech companies that are not AI companies at the core, we want to put on like a thinking hat of how would AI either replicate, replace, or accelerate, the outperformance of these companies. So I think ultimately going forward, for most VCs, every investment you make, you would have to ask whether this will be replaced by AI or it can be enhanced by AI. And that's a very key question for us right now because what we're seeing is that this technology, AI, is the fastest ever growing in the history of tech. Um, it's expanding and it's developing so fast that a lot of times even we have to catch up in terms of research or understanding of what's going on. And we think that it could have a much larger impact than the internet did like for the last 30 years. That's how big of a
Wow.
disruption it would be. So for us, we have to be very conscious of what we invest in and does AI help it or does AI replace it? I think that's a very important question that wasn't as obvious 2 years ago. Maybe we should have been more forward thinking, but I think every venture capitalist right now is asking that question.
Those are good questions. That's again, I haven't heard it put quite that way. You have a very good skill of taking the complex and putting it in simple terms, which is I would imagine very helpful for a venture capitalist. Um, but that is what everyone should be thinking about are those two questions. Is this going to be replaced or is this going to be enhanced by AI? And when you're doing your research, I'm just curious here, when you're doing your research on AI, what are the sources you're going to? Are you just checking the news every day? Are you learning from the companies you're invested in? How are you making sure that you're staying on top of what's breaking, what's new?
Yeah, I think every day when I wake up, obviously I read the news, read a lot of tech, tech focused news, understand what companies are fundraising, what developments there are in the space, AI space. And then, obviously if I see anything interesting, then I get my team, to dig deeper. Like I see this company, for example, we were looking at Perplexity. It's like a AI powered search engine that will maybe replace Google. We don't know. And then once I see the news about Perplexity, I go on and play around with it, for like 30 minutes or an hour, understand, the features, the product. Wow, this is like an AI powered search engine. It's much more efficient than Google. And then I get my team to dig into it, which means gathering any research papers related to it, understanding the team, because the team is very telling. If most of the best AI companies, their teams are made up of the top researchers in that field that developed the product. So they came up with a theory, they tested it, they tweaked around with it, and eventually made a working product based on their own theory. So we always like to go back to the research papers and start from the genesis of the idea to understand it. And then once we kind of understand, the theoretical parts of how they build up the AI, we will, there'll be a lot of times that we don't understand a lot of it because it's super, super technical. So if that happens, usually I reach out to either friends or people in the field, like even professors, to dig deeper and to really understand. But as I said, AI is changing so fast. It really takes a lot of effort and time to understand everything that's coming out and to understand whether those companies are really doing something that can last long, like have a moat and defensibility, or whether they'll be wiped out in the next 6 months. I think that's the craziest part of this whole AI ecosystem. Like, for example, I think a last batch of Y Combinator, there were a lot of application wrappers. So people were building these cool products and apps on top of like OpenAI or other large foundation models. And within 6 months, OpenAI basically just wiped them all out because they came up with a store that you could customize your GPTs, customize your models. So there's a lot of question about defensibility and how sticky your technology or product is in AI. And as I said, it's moving so fast. AI is disrupting itself. Like this AI company is disrupting that AI company, and it could wipe out like 1,000 companies in 6 months. So that's kind of like how fast and furious the space is, growing. And so that's why for us, we don't have a very huge team, but we always are like 24/7 focused on understanding the developments and then getting to the bottom of it, and then figuring out whether there are good investments to be made and why this company will not be wiped out in the next 12 months. That's the scariest part, I think, about AI itself. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like how you made the moat analogy, the defensibility. It is very interesting. And then you mentioned so you reach out to professors or friends. Along this journey, were there any big mentors or books or maybe even courses that stood out to you? Something that's really helped guide you?
Yeah, I think actually, when I first, wanted to learn more, surprisingly, if you go on Spotify and just search up the top AI podcasts, you're gonna get a bunch of them. I think NVIDIA has a really good like multi series podcast. And if you actually listen to that, you learn a lot of the basics very fast because like I've been reading like a lot of textbooks, and if you read textbook, it's actually quite hard to digest because there's a lot of theories, there's a lot of equations, and sometimes you might not even understand what you're reading if you're not like obviously I'm not a very technical background person. I came from like a finance background,
Mhm.
but I found that listening to podcasts is easier to digest, or even listening to interviews of the top like founders like Sam Altman from OpenAI. He has these 1 to 2 hour interviews. He's like talked to so many people, like even Bill Gates. If you watch some of them, they basically break down the space or what they're working on in very simplified terms. I think that's probably the best place to start when you're building an understanding of it.
I apologize. This is my first time having this issue. I'm assuming it's because I'm not in my home base. Uh, anyway, so we got to, and I'll clip this all together, by the way, but we got to Bill Gates. So you listen to some interviews from Sam and Bill, and
Yeah, I mean, interviews. YouTube has such amazing content. Like, if you really wanted to start understanding AI, like podcasts on Spotify and YouTube will give you at least like 50 to 100 hours of content you can digest. And then if you really want to get like very technical, you can read textbooks, you can take online courses, you can like dig into research papers. But I think just getting the core understanding is enough for daily life or daily understanding of digesting the news and understanding the updates. Yeah.
very cool, very cool. I'll definitely. So Nvidia's podcast, I actually being
Yeah.
on a podcast and posting on YouTube, I never even thought about that. That's a really good idea. That something I should definitely look into myself. And I'll ask you a few more questions. I'm having some technical issues, but I would love to do this again in the future when I can have some more time with you. But what are some from an entrepreneurial standpoint here? In my last questions, what are some of the most critical skills you believe an entrepreneur needs to be successful?
Yeah, I think the top skill that all entrepreneurs need is critical, problem solving, right? Like as an entrepreneur, when you start anything, there's going to be so many fires you have to put out. You have to, think really fast on your feet and basically put out fires all day. That's basically the life of an entrepreneur for the first year or like few years. Um, so being very, critical, thinking very fluidly, being very agile in the way you solve problems. I think probably that's what sets you apart, from an entrepreneur that fails to an entrepreneur that solves all the problems and keeps building up their business. And then second, I think leadership is extremely important. I think an entrepreneur just needs to understand where their strengths are and where their weaknesses are, and then they have to have the ability to identify the team that kind of complements their strengths and also take cares of their weakness. Right? You have like a lot of entrepreneurs are extremely smart, talented, but sometimes they're over their head and they don't hire the right team around them to build out a business, and that's when a lot of them fail. But I think if they have the right team and leadership to actually guide the team, they will be much more productive, and they will basically come up with solutions that even they themselves probably wouldn't have. And that's how I think really good companies are built. And then finally, I think entrepreneur needs the hunger or drive. It's extremely hard to build something from scratch, right? Like to take something from 0 to 10, extremely hard, right? Like you're coming from an idea to something tangible. That takes a lot of effort, motivation that most normal people probably would give up in the first like month or so, just because of how hard it is. And then from 10 to 100, it takes like drive and perseverance to like conquer the pressures, like of how you're going to sustain the team, how you're going to grow the team, what happens if your business is failing, do you need to pivot? Like there's so many problems that you're faced with. So just having that drive and hunger to succeed is what ultimately makes a entrepreneur accomplish like what seems like an impossible task to grow a company.
I like that. So building a good team, having a hunger and a drive, leadership, uh, all of that makes a lot of sense. Is there any other advice you would give to somebody that wants to start their own company?
Yeah, I think ultimately, um, like for me when I first started, like there would never be a moment where it feels right to do it. But if you even have like the urge or you have a thought inside, I suggest you just dive right in and just do it, because ultimately like life is short. You don't know how many opportunities you're going to get, and you rather try build a company and fail and learn from that, and then build your next company or do something else than not have tried. So it would never feel like there are no perfect conditions or times for you to ultimately build a company. If you have enough um, ideas or a drive, you could just do it, and then with a bit of luck, you probably could grow into something really great. So that's kind of my advice. Like don't overthink it. If you want to do it, just go do it. And then even if you fail, that's like a really good lesson, and it will guide you for the rest of your life.
I love it. I love it. And finally, what do you have coming up here in the next 6 months or so? Is there anything? I mean, I don't have to give away any of your secrets here, but anything exciting that you have coming up down the road?
Yeah, I think we're continuing investing mostly into AI companies. I think this year the exciting thing is there'll be more mediums that are cracked. So like last year, ChatGPT really took text. It basically redefined how we interact with text, writing, reading. I think in the next 6 to 12 months, stuff like image generation, it's already pretty good, but it can get much better. And then like video generation by AI is getting very crazy. So if you saw OpenAI Sora, like the quality of
Yeah.
video that can be generated, that's just crazy to me. It's like mind blowing. And then I think the other area that people really haven't touched upon is audio. So think about if AI could generate audio or like music, that's extremely exciting to us as well. And then to package it all together, if an AI model could um, interact with more than one medium really well, that would make it extremely interesting. And that's what we call multimodal. Like I think OpenAI is starting to get there. Like you can generate text, you can do video, you can do images. It understands all of these different mediums and helps you, be more productive altogether. So I think in the next 6 months we're really focused on, this area of AI.
Very cool. I'm excited to see where AI goes. I'm also excited to see where Soul Ventures goes. I'm excited to keep in touch and follow along the journey. Warren, thank you so much for taking the time. I apologize for some of these technical difficulties. Next time I'll be at my own home base back in Chicago, and I will not have those. I promise you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, and happy to catch up anytime.
Of course, of course. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks so much. See you.